Good morning, class. So for our midterm lesson, part of our midterm lessons, we will be continuing our discussion with the language acquisition. Again, our subject is Elementary 27, teaching English in elementary grades through language arts, which means to say, as elementary teacher, as you becoming, you need to let the students appreciate the language. You need to let them learn English through the process of understanding language arts. Okay, as elementary teacher, this is very crucial enough because you are teaching the students the basic one. You need to let them understand and appreciate the language arts. That is why this is about teaching English through language arts. Now, in our preliminary context or the content of our preliminary period, it's talking about the language acquisition, talking about the module one, first language acquisition, second language acquisition, bilingualism, definitions, differences, and similarities. And for our midterm, we will be continuing with our second module. Okay, please, you have your own copy of the hard copy, then just turn the pages of your module into page 6. Okay, so for our page 6, we'll be talking about the first child language acquisition. Now we talk about the language acquisition research. Okay, so I gave you this handout, so I am anticipating that you've read this in advance. Okay, I will just be discussing salient points or important matters that needed to be understood by the students. So the content of this module is talking about the behaviorism, okay, the versus the language acquisition device for the nativism. Okay, until 1960s, the research agenda of language acquisition studies, just like that of psychology and linguistics in general. Okay, so this was strongly determined by the behaviorist learning theories. There are many learning theories or the cognitive theories that is talking about the process of how a child thinks or how the child develops his or her language, acquire the language, or understand or use in a context or apply language in a day-to-day basis. Okay, so there's an explanation referring to mental capacities of the learner seems or did not seem to make much sense in that context. It would indeed have been regarded as non-scientific approach to the problem. Okay, only after the constraints and restrictions of behavior psychology had been shaken off could the language sciences begin to understand language learning as a mental activity happening in the cognitive system of individual. Okay, that's why it is important that you also understand the theory of Chomsky and Skinner's as well, because they are a cognitivist. Okay, and they also talk about the verbal behavior, which is a milestone on this road of the cognitive turn of how the language or how the child understand or acquire the language. Okay, so with Chomsky, with respect to the language faculty, the issues put on the research agenda by this change of this perspective includes, among other things, the problem of how to characterize the language and as well as to explain how this language is used, and most importantly in the present context. Okay, because the child may be involved into different contexts, and those contexts may be depending on how they actually how they actually use the language in contextualizing different activities. Okay, uh, talking also about as we continue, on the other hand, took somewhat longer to liberate itself from dominating influence of behaviorism. Okay, this is partly due perhaps to the fact that for a long time it had been exclusively been occupied and still continues to primarily concern with foreign language learning in classroom settings rather than with the naturalistic L2 or language second language acquisition. Okay, always bear in mind or understand that the students are actually learning English as their second language. Again, you are teaching the students to acquire English as part of their second language. Okay, very important that as you become elementary teachers in becoming or in the future, you also really need to radiate the love of understand or love of communication and appreciating English. appreciating the language arts or the beauty of language that we could offer, okay, that they could learn, that they need to appreciate this one. Because if it will not start anew as elementary teachers, then the students could not really appreciate what you are teaching to them, which means you yourself needs to be passionate enough in teaching English through language arts. Okay, the idea that learning crucially implies changing previously acquired behavior seems to have been deeply rooted in language teaching. So it's been there. It is therefore not surprising that the interference of the first language, and in part still is regarded as the major determining to shape the second language, which means to say, it's basically saying that in appreciating or understanding the second language, there is also the influence of the first language. Do not deviate or let yourself be away on that fact. Okay? The research paradigm actually elaborated this idea in considerable detail is contrastive analysis, or what we call the CA. Okay, so moreover, let's talk about the cognitive turn in page 7. Okay, explicitly cognitive orientation of the second language of the English acquisition or language acquisition research was initiated in the late 1960s. Just like what is mentioned in our previous topic or previous discussion, the change is best illustrated by the seminal paper by Pete Corder during 1967. Actually, he refers to the child's innate predisposition to acquire the language. How do they acquire the language? Okay, the predisposition, the internal mechanism. This is very important, which makes the acquisition of grammar possible. Okay, and then raises the question of whether the child's language making capacity remains available to second language learners. Okay, very important. You need to. This is very significant in understanding the cognitive or the cognitive processes of the child as they develop in acquiring the language. Okay, that is why there is a connection, or there is a need for us to understand the brain development at the same time the child's development, because the child's development matches the brain development as they acquire the language. Okay, and also, moreover, although he's careful about the conclusions to be drawn from these assumptions, he leaves no doubt about the fact that he favors a positive answer. Okay, postulating the same mechanism for the first language and the second language acquisition, and proposes. Okay, and then also, quarter means by strategies is not entirely clear. Okay, this is also talking about the quarter. Nor he does elaborate on the last point, that is what might cause the emergence of the different learning sequences, in spite of the claim that the underlying mechanisms are the same. Okay, so he does, however, list what he sees as differences between the two acquisition types. Okay, namely, what is that? What are those? We have the language, or children acquiring their first language. Second one, oppose the language learners, or learners are inevitably successful. And then language development is part of the child's maturalization or maturational process. And the last one, we have at the onset of the second language acquisition, another language is already present. And the last one, we have the motivation for language acquisition is quite different in the two cases, which means the motivation of a child, okay, plays a very important role or vital in the process of understanding or acquiring the language. That is why the role of the teachers, you as becoming elementary teachers, very important again, that it could be seen concretely on you, that you are motivating the students to understand English language and not degrading them. Which means to say, when students do not speak well in English, they incorrectly use the grammar. Do not say tell something bad about them. Okay, because it's part of the acquiring process. Because they are little by little acquiring the knowledge or the language, because that's part of the process, part of the brain development, child's development, and the process on the context. Okay, and then moreover, okay, Porter also suggests studying the errors found in the language or the second language speech. He distinguishes between random mistakes and systematic errors. The latter he claims in page 166, and then he revealed his learners okay, underlying language or knowledge of the language today, or as we may call it, the transitional competence. Again, the word is the transitional competence, which is essential. If, for example, learners use form think, okay, this suggests that they have acquired knowledge about tense marking in English, even if this particular form is an error. This is very important. Deviating from the target norm, from what is usual, from what is normal, and truly simulating another ideas in order during 1967. Okay, and that's with respect to the present situation. Okay, another one, they also suggested the similar to the transitional competence were indeed made by a number of authors. There are so many authors which talks about the what is this transitional competence and their thoughts about this. They are proposing approximative systems. Okay, that includes Nemmer in 1971. Okay, idiosyncratic dialects. Okay, or interlanguages by Slinker 1972. These terms are not synonymous. Again, they're not the same with each other, not synonymous. Okay, but they coincide insofar as they postulate a structured transitional knowledge based in the second language learner. Again, they coincide. They are not synonymous, but they coincide to postulate the structural or structured transitional knowledge based in the second language learners. Okay, it contains elements of the target grammar, possibly also elements of the first language grammar or the interlingual errors, okay, which was supported by Richard in 1971, and most importantly, elements different from both source and target systems. Okay, these are what we call the developmental errors, or what we call the intralingual errors. Okay, also supported by Richard in 1971, which further proves that the learner is actively and creatively participating in the acquisitional process. Okay, again, in the intralingual errors, it proves that the learners are actively and creatively participating in the acquisitional process. Okay, the term most generally adopted in Slinkers in 1972, or what we call the interlanguage. Okay, we also have okay, that further concludes the page 6 to page 8. Now, also understand the milestones of the first language acquisition, how the students or the learners learn the first sounds. Okay, again, this is part of the child's development, brain development, which tells something and supports or matters or vital in the language development of a child. Okay, because communication is always there. Communication is part of our survival. Part of our survival for us to express our thoughts, our opinions, and express our needs. Now, milestones of the first language acquisition, they need to learn the first sounds. Okay, this begins with the speech perceptions. Okay, that includes, for instance, the ability to segment the speech stream into meaningful units, to recognize one's own name in the speech stream. That is why as a child learn to speak, they first learn how to pronounce the name of their parents, okay, to say the name of their parents or their how they call their parents. That's part of the learning the first language acquisition, or the milestone on learning this, or to distinguish between similar sounding vowels. Okay, these are very critical skill that infants develop in early stages of life. Okay, these early language skills involve visual information. Okay, for instance, infants as young as 2 months have been shown to be able to match vowel sounds they hear with the appropriate lip. Again, very crucial that during the milestone of the first language acquisition, okay, there is a need for the involvement of the visual information. Again, for instance, infants as young as 2 months have been shown to be able to match vowel sounds they hear with the appropriate lip movements, mouth, and face movements. Okay, this early speech perception skills related to the sound structure of language, and it may also help infants to bootstrap into a more complex language competencies. Okay, when we say bootstrapping, it refers to the possibility that skills in one area of language might help the child to develop competencies in other language areas. Okay, so these are very remarkable or milestone in the process of acquiring the language in the first early stages of a child or an infant. Okay, or in on their first language acquisition. Okay, another one example: infants' ability to recognize their own names in the speech tree. Okay, which appears around fifth month. This may provide them with a means to recognize novel, adjacent words, and so on. Okay, and then also, okay, all infants, part also of the milestone in the development of the language of infants, all infants begin to bubble anywhere between 4 and 6 months, and generally to continue to do so until they reach around 1 year of age. Okay, so bubbling is characterized by vowel or consonant vowel sounds such as oh or ma. Okay, those are just words. Okay, at this age, infants' tongues tend to be relatively large compared to the size of their mouths, and as a result, these sounds will often be palatals. Okay, they also have the labial sounds and then so on, and then on the page 10 they also learn the first words sometimes around their first birthdays. Okay, part of the language development of a child, children begin to assign specific meanings to the sounds they produce. Again, during the first age, children commonly begins to assign specific meanings to the sounds they produce. This first word marked the beginning of what is known as the holoplastic stage. Again, when we say holoplastic stage, it is characterized by one word sentences. Okay, infants tend to use single words to communicate a variety of complex functions. Okay, children's words at this stage tend to be concrete objects which are grounded in central everyday experiences and interactions, such as light, tree, water. Okay, rather than the abstract concepts. Again, they are more grounded with the everyday experiences or interactions that they have as they learn the language. Okay, as they acquire the language. We're talking about again the language acquisition. They prefer more in understanding examples, the light, tree, water, rather than abstract concepts. Rather than abstract concepts just like peace, happiness, and so on. Because these are not yet being understood under ages. Okay? These first words tend to be content words, just like bear or bed, rather than the function, the, end, on. Okay, I hope you're getting my point. For children learning English, most first words are nouns. Again, in the elementary teachers, no? You are teaching English to students. So very important, you are also knowledgeable about how they acquire the language. Now, for children learning English, most first words are nouns. Okay, again, talking about the parts of speech, when we say nouns, these are all names under the sun. Okay, which means these are names of person, place, things, or events, and so on. This seems to be related to the fact that sentences in English typically end with nouns. Okay, again, this is because most of the fact that sentences in English typically ends with noun. Okay, where they are salient or more noticeable to the learners. This is not the case for children learning all languages. However, for instance, Korean learning infants, first words are often verbs. Again, for other this is not applicable to everyone because, for example, Korean learning infants, first words are often verbs. Okay, in the Korean language, Verbs are sentence final, and sentences may consist of only a verb because this is contextualized, because this depends upon culture. This is culture to culture. Okay, because the Korean learning infants, they learn first more of the verb. Okay, because in Korean language, verbs are sentence final and sentences may consist only of a verb. Okay, so very important that you know about this one. Now, while working to master the vocabulary around them, children often engage in both semantic overextension and underextension. Again, overextension and underextension. For instance, a child may overextend the meaning of the word water, okay, to include not just drinking water, but also juice, milk, and soda. Underextension, on the other hand, seems to be less common because this refers to the reverse phenomenon. A child, for example, might use baby only to refer to an infant sibling and not to the other babies that he or she encounters. Okay? And then around the age of 2, now children enter the two-word stage. Okay, when we say they enter the two-word stage, it is characterized by use of phrases which are not more than 2 words. For English learning infants, this typically means combining a subject verb. For example, baby cry, mama sleep. These are combination of 2 words. Or a verb and modifier. Example, eat now, go out. Okay, the ordering of these 2 word phrases is not fixed. However, this tends to be limited systematic use of grammatical morphology. For example, the possessive is formed as Miranda bed rather than Miranda's bed. Okay, as in many other stages for their linguistic development, children's capacity for comprehending words outpaces their production ability. Okay, for instance, around the age of 1, children can typically understand about 70 different words. Okay, but only productively use about 6 of those words. This is about a 4 to 6 month, okay, delay between when children can comprehend a given number of words and when they can produce that many words themselves. Okay, sometimes around the end of the second year of their lives, or the 2 years of their age, children's productive vocabulary begins to develop rapidly. Again, 2 years of age, their vocabulary productively begins to develop rapidly. This is sometimes known as the vocabulary spurt. Again, vocabulary spurt. During this period, children begin to add about 200 words a month to their vocabularies. Okay, so that's the end of our topic. Okay, that's up until the page 11. So for the remaining pages of your module, I will be giving you a task of reading the rest, and the next meeting we'll be having another recorded lecture in which I will only be discussing salient points in our module. Okay, so right after this, please always be updated in our e-class. Again, our e-class is drp.ocampo.cotabato.com. Okay, so always update yourselves with the announcements, with the lessons important, and as well as the quizzes. So now I'm saying to you that right after this recorded lecture, I'll be giving a quiz. So make sure that you will watch and understand this video or recorded lecture, because right after this we'll be having a quiz, and it is an assessment whether you understood or not, or you watch or not the video. Okay, thank you very much, and God bless us all.